Welcome back to another episode of Card Talk, a podcast where we spend just a little bit of time talking about cards from Lord of the Rings, the card game. I'm your host, Dave Walsh.
And I'm Ted Bannock, and this is going to be, I'm going to be a little stern on this episode.
Oh.
Okay, wow. Okay, I'm going to lay things down. It's going to be a real hard, long, flat, strong piece of steel-like episode. So.
Well, then I guess we better get right into how people can stay in contact with us so we can,
drive the steel wheel of podcasting.
Yes. Okay. So, I'll be quick about it. We have Second Breakfast. Micah, thank you so much for everything you do. That's on our YouTube channel. Micah likes to play some live games on our YouTube over there. He records some of it. He plays live some other times. But it's a lot of fun for him to do that. We love that he does that for us. Over at cardtalk2018.com, Matt keeps up with the pod, and he blogs about every card that we talk about. So if you're interested in reading, you want to get some inspiration for something, hey, there it is. And if you're listening to this on a podcast, whatever app, we're over on YouTube, and if you're seeing us on YouTube, we're on podcast apps, so whatever you want. And also, if you want to help support what we do, go over to patreon.com/cardtalk2018. And before Ted yells at me in his stern voice,
hey,
I'm going to toss it over to him. Ted, what do we
got?
Right.
Today's card is sterner than steel.
Oh. Sterner than what?
Steel.
Steel. Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. Just making sure.
Originally released in the Flame of the West deluxe box, however, it's been recently repackaged in the Return of the King player card expansion. And this is a really great card here. I'm going to read it to you. It's a tactics event that costs 0. That has a response, exhaust a weapon or armor card attached to the defending character to cancel a shadow effect just triggered during combat. Wowie zowie.
Now, Ted, I ask this honestly because how many cards require you to exhaust? How many weapons and armor do you have to exhaust in order to use an ability that they
have? I'm going to say not many.
Yeah.
Most of them have a passive effect. Mm-hmm. And just to support a rules clarification thing that I've seen some newer players ask is they say, oh, if I exhaust my, let's say you play this and then you exhaust, let's say you have a Citadel plate from the core set, right? A Citadel plate gives you +4 hit points. You could exhaust that to play this card to cancel the shadow effect, and some players might think that when a weapon or armor is exhausted, they somehow lose the bonus, but that is not true. They're like, oh, do I still get my hit points? And I'm like, yeah, it doesn't matter that it's exhausted,
right?
And so not many of them have effects that do. Now there are a couple. A couple episodes ago now, we did Bow of You, for example, which is a weapon, and you have to exhaust it to deal a point of damage to an enemy. And if that's exhausted for the effect already, you can't exhaust a card that's already exhausted.
Right. I guess my point is how much of a detriment is exhausting weapon or armor in order to cancel the shadow effect, because that's the cost.
Almost nothing.
Yeah, it costs 0 resources, and I mean, if the problem is that you need to cancel the shadow effect as opposed to maybe triggering, let's say, Foe Hammer or Goblin Cleave or some other card, cancel the shadow effect. Like, that's a no-brainer, right? Like, there are other cards that use, mainly tactics cards, that require you to trigger the weapon or armor to then use them. Goblin Cleaver and Foe Hammer are the two that come to mind right away. But, like, okay. Like, I don't see that as a huge cost. So that said, like, this is one of those things, like, why wouldn't you include this card in your tactics deck?
Yeah. It basically, like, if you're running weapon or armor on a character has some defensive capability already, then this is a great card and pretty much just immediately goes in, right? If I'm playing Tactics Baragond, I'm going to throw 3 of these in there because I'm playing Gondor Shields, I'm playing Citadel Plates, Spear of the Citadel even, which I think actually that might be one. I'm going to check if Spear of the Citadel, if you have to exhaust it, but I don't even think I don't even think that one you have to do. But the cost of having to exhaust a weapon or armor is basically to help limit these types of effects.
Sure.
Right? So if you only have a single weapon, you cannot both trigger you can't trigger a Foe Hammer and this card in the same round.
Right.
Because you can exhaust
forces
that
you
card.
to make a decision, right? Like,
yeah.
Right. If you have just a Dagger of Westerness on something, right? Like, I always feel like the Dagger of Westerness is kind of like the universal weapon that gets put into decks. Like,
it's very generically good. Yeah. Like, you can kind of count on it no matter what.
It's cheap, it's good. Like, it has a little bit of a bonus, but like, so, and
Spear of the Citadel, by the way, nope, you don't have to exhaust it. If response just says after attached character is declared as a defender, deal damage to attacking enemy. So just so you guys, again, if you exhaust this to defend, and let's say you have a way to ready, from an unexpected courage, a desperate defense, you can, which we also just covered, you can trigger Spear of the Citadel again, even though it's exhausted.
Right. So what's the downside of this card? I mean, okay, I'll say what I think it is, but there's got to be more to it, is what I'm getting at. Like, of course, the downside is that it's tactics, and the downside is that you have to have weapon or armor. And I mean, let's be honest, not like I couldn't play this in my Sylvan deck because I don't have tactics. I don't have a tactics resource, so like I can't play that. I do, and I have very little in terms of weapons and armor. So, you know.
And if you're only armor, you're a big fan of what's the 4-cost armor? Heirloom armor?
No, the ancestral armor.
Ancestral armor. Thank you.
Heirloom.
That's close.
Yeah.
That cost 4, right? So that's kind of gatekeeping you from, like, first you have to get the ancestral armor, and then you got to spend 4 resources to play it. Oh. So generally, you want to play less expensive weapons or armor, and there's plenty of ones that cost 1, 2, 0, even below
round
shields.
Right.
And so
you don't have to exhaust.
So round shield you do have to exhaust.
You do have to exhaust the round shield.
Yeah, so round shield, that's actually a great one to bring up. So round shield gives you a defense bonus when you get a shadow card, but you have to exhaust it. Okay. Yeah, after a shadow effect is triggered during combat, exhaust round shield to get +2. So if you are doing multiple defenses, you can't use round shield. It's just like you said, it's a decision point. Like, oh, do I use round shield now, even though the same character's blocking again? And what if I need to boost that defense? Or what if I need to play
a Stern and Steel to cancel get rid of the
Right. Usually, though, if I can, like, the general rule is like, well, it just depends on the shadow effect. But usually, like, if you need to cancel the shadow effect, it's gonna trump whatever bonus you're getting. Right. Like, I'm gonna give up the +2 bonus on round shield to probably can't. Like, if the shadow effect is enemy makes an additional attack.
Yeah. So yeah, sterner than steel. Boom, done.
Right. I'd rather take some extra damage, not get my bonus than a whole nother attack with a whole nother shadow card.
Right.
So, So yeah, you might.
Some of the unique, like Golden Shield, you have to exhaust.
That yes, exactly. To get its
Heragrim, you have
defense.
to exhaust. You know, like so
Yeah.
there are. I mean, but it's not a ton. I feel like a lot of the generic ones you don't have to exhaust to do anything with. So maybe some of the
No.
unique ones you do a little bit more often.
Yeah, like
But
War Axe, Warrior Sword.
right, Legacy Blade, like
Yeah.
like just it's like okay, let's.
There's another armor. Raven Wing Helm.
Ravenwing Helm
Is an armor that it goes on a sentinel and you have to exhaust it to cancel a point of damage.
right.
So again, you have that decision point, but
Right.
usually you're better off taking the damage than whatever the shadow effect is.
Right. So back to my original point is, what's preventing me, as long as I have the way to play it, and I'm provided I'm playing the right type of deck where I have 9,
Yeah.
or some weapons and armor. Like what's preventing me from playing this card, or why am I not playing this card?
So yeah, like if you're playing the tactics deck, right, and you have weapons and armor in your deck, if you have all those conditions and you're the one fighting the enemies, or you at least have a sentinel defender who that character is defending, you should be playing this card. Because I know there are some players who are like nuts to shadow cancellation. They just don't believe in it,
right?
For whatever reason,
right.
And that's fine. That's fine too if you just want to play the game without that kind of blanket or
chicanery. What? You're canceling shadow effect? Well, here I will. Can I defend that just for 1 second?
Sure.
When I play solo, a solo deck has to do almost everything.
So low in your mindset. You like to just sink down to be depressed.
And it's one of those things, like, because you can't do everything, you have to pick what's the most important things to be able to do in certain decks. And so shadow cancellation is one of those things that I'll roll the dice on, as opposed to, because like a feint, for example, 1 cost, like that is better than Sterner Than Steel, because then you don't have to take the attack. So Gaffer Gamgee you can use and not take the attack, as opposed to
right.
So so I can see I am one of those that not oftentimes, but sometimes will say shadow cancellation just can't go into this deck, or else I'd have a 80 card deck, and you know how the community feels about 80 card decks.
That it's 20 cards short of Perilous Voyage.
Right. That's exactly right. You get up to that high and you're like, oh, I'm going to do a Perilous Voyage deck at that point. It's like, okay.
But yeah, so I understand that argument, but if you're looking for I'll tell you what, the one drawback to this card is opposed to like Hasty Stroke or what's the Sylvan ones? Swifter than Sight?
Yeah. Quicker than Sight.
Quicker than Sight thing. I'm so close. Okay.
Yeah. I know. Yeah. Ted, we're gonna have to get you to the table here. I mean, I know you've played recently, but you have a job to do here.
More often. Yeah. And I used to be the guy that I listened to a lot of other content creators, and I was like the one screaming at my listing device, being like, it's like Warrior Sword, the card you're thinking. I'm like, screaming. Right. They're like, I don't know what card this is. And now that's become me.
Yeah.
Thank you. Quicker Than Sight. Quicker Than Sight and Hasty Stroke will cancel any shadow effect period that just triggered.
Right.
So you cannot even be involved in an attack. It can be another player on the other side of the table defending against an enemy that is doing nothing to you. And you'd be like, I'm going to help you out and cancel that shadow effect.
Right.
You can't do this with Sterner Than Steel. You have to be defending it.
Right. Now, this says during combat. Does that mean the combat phase, or does that just mean when the other guy is when the enemy is attacking you?
That's a great question. So this is not, it just means anytime you're in an attack, because sometimes enemies make attacks outside of the combat phase through like a quest effect or a treachery card, right? They attack you during the staging step. if it were that case, it would say combat response. It would say it's a combat. Well, I don't even think those exist actually. There's
I know. I
combat
was gonna say,
actions.
yeah, right. There's
Um,
no. I've never seen a
I don't.
specific response.
Yeah,
It
there are
could
some
be like,
actions.
I was gonna say there could be something that says during the combat phase, response
Yeah,
during the combat phase. Blah 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 blah. Blah.
yeah. So if there's maybe one card or not that many, but this is just a response. I know it says triggered during combat, but it's not the combat phase specifically. So that's another
Right.
great rules clarification.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you should play this in your like. I play this in like a Grimbjorn deck, because Grimbjorn sometimes, can't handle the things, and he always is getting weapons and armor on him, so he gets all the things. So I like to put this into a Grimbjorn deck.
Yeah.
Like you said, Barragond, it's another option for Barragond. It's another option when you have the Golden Shield on Eowyn or the Golden Shield on Theoden, and then you have you need another weapon other than the Golden Shield, but that's who you're using to defend when you have the Golden Shield on those things. So I don't know.
Yeah. So it's not ideal for every, if that's like the only weapon or armor in your deck are ones that have an exhaust ability, then yeah, you might want to look at a different way to cancel shadow cards, or you just have to be mindful of that. Like you can't have both effects. But again, a lot of times, like, if you need to cancel a shadow effect, it's because it's doing something like really bad.
Right. What's the worst shadow effect? Like obviously it's specific on the scenario and the conditions and stuff, but in general, what's the shadow effect that you want to see the least? I know which one it is for me, but I want to hear what you say.
Making an extra attack is
absolutely
pretty bad.
100%.
I hate up that. There.
You know why? Is because you've already figured out who's going to defend who and who's going to attack back, and then all of a sudden you have to make an additional attack, and everything goes out the window, and you have to start over again.
Right. Yeah. Although sometimes the bonuses are like, I remember in some of the early scenarios, it's like, I'm going to take this tiny attack undefended, but the bonus is like if +3 if the attack's undefended.
Yeah.
So then it's like, okay, well now I have like a dead hero.
Right.
Right. Ones that raise your threat are not so bad. There's ones that deal automatic damage, and those ones are not so bad. I think of some of the. Yeah, you especially if it moves the enemy, if it says like move, or if the enemy returns to the staging area,
right?
Because then you cannot kill it, and you might have, if it's a big enemy, you might have planned to kill it that turn. Like, okay, you're going to do this. I want to play, this, and I'm going to, and you're like, oh my God, the enemy like goes back. I can't even kill it.
Foiled plan,
So, but if it says like moves to the next player and then makes an attack, those are pretty bad because then like
that's an additional attack, right? Like that's the additional attack thing.
Yeah, but it could be even worse because if it's someone who's like more quester and they have like nobody ready, it can be like a lot worse for another player who's maybe not playing a combat heavy deck. So that's probably the number one that I'm canceling.
Yeah.
Is it the same for you?
Well, I mean, the only thing that I hate the additional attack. Right. That's the one, because the reason why I hate it is because of the additional attack. I'm playing solo. I've managed to live, and then all of a sudden I get an additional attack, and it just screws everything up. And then the additional attack means an additional shadow card, which means another chance to get an additional attack. So, like, because the shadow effects are never, there could be 3 or 4 cards, 3 or 4 of those copies of that card with that shadow effect on it. And so, the additional attack is just the worst. in general.
Yeah.
That's the one I hate. The
or
other, there's the specific one I can't stand is the also like, put this enemy engaged with you. Like there's like a wimpy enemy, you flip it over and it's like this enemy becomes engaged with you. But that's not like a ubiquitous like standard shadow.
Yeah, that's not in like
like
every scenario,
right.
But
there's
it's
some
in
of
a
those.
handful.
Yeah, there's some of these Arid Mithrin cycle cards that like the Stray Goblin. They go up into the staging area, or I don't know, like. That's dumb too, for the same reason, because I've already planned out what I'm going to do, and now I have an extra thing to try to defend or attack, and like
yeah. Or sometimes it'll say like this enemy can't take damage this turn.
Yeah,
and you're like,
those
like
are
anything
like
that prevents you from killing it. Sometimes, yeah, like it'll boost its boost its defense, it boosts its stats,
right?
And then you can't kill it, and you're like, oh my god, and you like held back questers, so you'd have more attack power, and you and then you're like, my plan is foiled.
Right.
You have and this helps prevent all of those things.
Right. Yeah. That's why I hate / love this game. Like the decisions that you have to make is what makes this game so great and lousy all at the same time.
Yeah.
Should we talk about the artwork of this card?
Yeah. Hey, the artwork is depicting an iconic moment, right? From Return of the King, right? With Eowyn staring down the Witch King.
I'm wondering. You keep talking. I'm gonna find my playmat here.
Okay. Yes, it's a pretty iconic moment with the Witch King depicted on top of the. I'm just out the door with names today. The winged beast thing that they ride. So
the fell beast, Ted. The
fell beast. Yeah, thank you. I was close. Again, I was close. And I really like different like Witch King art is pretty cool because it's depicted in so many different ways. And this is another pretty excellent depiction. So David's holding up for those of you that are listening. He's they took this art and they printed it on a playmat, a licensed playmat from FFG. You actually have one that's from a fellowship event that I forgot that they did. So there's one with a fellowship event logo, and then
it's the 2016 fellowship.
Okay, that's cool. There was a period of time too where they were just selling it outright.
Without the fellowship
logo
thing on it. Yep.
Yeah, and those ones are kind of sought after because they're kind of hard to find, some of those playmats nowadays. So, but yeah, it's a cool moment. Is the you can see the White Tower too, behind, or Gondor, Minas Tirith behind the Witch King too. So it's a pretty cool scene.
The Battle of Pelennor Field, right?
Yes.
I think this is when it's what's going on. Yeah, I think the artwork is great. It's kind of hazy. Is that what I'm looking for? It's like the camera's not quite in focus, but I think that gives a lot of like feel for what it makes it more like a battle for me. Like I like that for this artwork. It's good. I think that I'm glad I have the playmat. I'm glad that I have the I'm glad that I use this card. And I'm glad, Ted, that I went first last episode, because you know what? We need to bring this card.
Okay. Let's do it.
Yeah, I don't know if you've forgotten, Ted, but we have a highly scientific yet arbitrary system where we ring a card on a scale from 1 to 10. And a 1 is the one card to rule them all, and a 10 is the card that we throw back into the fiery chasm from whence it was made. So, Ted, you get to go first here.
So if a 1 rating is the 1 ring, I guess I want to give this the steel ring, which is like a 2.
The steel ring,
right below, or maybe it goes like silver. I don't really know how it works, but anyway, I'm gonna give it a 2 because canceling shadow effects is super good, and this card is in sphere with a card that it's in sphere with the combat oriented sphere, right? Like you're doing fighting and tactics. It costs 0 resources to play, so it's only kind of, from that perspective, it's a matter of how much card draw you have, which tactics doesn't have a ton by itself, but it's very easy to supplement with other heroes and other spheres. And it's only real cost to playing the card, which you do have to meet. You have to have a weapon or armor in play, and you have to exhaust it from the character that is doing the defense. So if you can't do that, you can't play the card. If you can't meet those conditions. So in essence, like by itself, yeah, it does nothing. If you don't have that armor in play, this card does absolutely nothing. So some people will, that's a reason enough for them to not play it, because it's contingent upon some other card being in play. But I think that there's so many of those in the game, and again, so many just in Sphere, that so many of my decks get sterner than steel, because if I'm doing defending, I want shadow cancellation to keep my defender alive.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think that this is a great card. Playing solo, I'm going to be a little less necessity on it, but I think that this card does what you need it to do. And like playing solo, you're going to have weapons and armor on stuff unless you're playing a specific deck. Even Hobbit decks, you build up Sam with weapons and armor, you build up Mary with weapons and armor. So you do things with weapons and armor in this game all the time. So, that said, it's playing solo. There's just times when like you said, and we argued a little bit about it, about dealing with shadow effects is just something that sometimes I don't do. So, I roll the dice, and there's other ways to deal with shadow effects sometimes that aren't just
taking them to the face.
Yeah, right. Taking them or canceling attacks, or just whatever. In Sylvan deck you have feign voices, and or you can always just plan to chump, right? Like that's a thing. So, but that said, again, shadow effects are super unpredictable, and they can annoy the crap out of everybody.
They penalize you for a lot of shadow effects. Are if this attack defeats character, do something worse. Mm-hmm. Raise your threat, take damage. Whatever.
Right. So I'm going to be harder on this card than you were, but not much. I'm going to give this card a 3 instead of a 2, because a 2 is approaching like staple in just about every deck. A 1 would be this card goes in every deck you make that it can go in. A 2 to me is like you better think about putting this in every deck. A 3 is like this probably is a good solution for a lot of things, but there may be other ways to do it, sort of.
Yeah. Yeah. It helps you manage shadow cards, which are a main component of the game.
Right. Burning Brand, is another, option for this.
Right.
It's different sphere, different things to do, but
there's plenty other strategies for handling shadow cards, or if you have like a hero like Erkenbrand, he can cancel it with his ability.
Right.
But even with I've run decks with Erkenbrand in this card, because sometimes you're defending multiple attacks in a round. Right. So anyway, give it a try, or do whatever the hell you want. Who are we to say?
But I think
play the game how you want. We don't really
right. The last thing that I'll say is that this card just came out with the Return of the King repackage, so I think it's important that you go through this and you see that this card is valuable and can be valuable and should be really considered when you're in that space of tactics and you have weapons and armor. It's worth looking at it and not maybe using your old standbys. This may be the solution for a lot of that. So
and it's true. It's a great, if you have a limited card pool and you maybe only have the core set and then maybe 1 or 2 of these expansions, it's a great alternative to Hasty Stroke. So if you're like, man, I feel like I'm always playing Spirit to cancel Hasty Stroke, well, now you have another option, right? So it's just kind of it's kind of nice again to have a different strategy. Or I've played decks where I just want to cancel as much shadow as possible because the shadow effects are so bad, like in Karn Doom.
I know, right?
There's scenarios where you're like, I cannot stand these shadow effects, and I will play a Spirit and Tactics deck, and I will run multiple cards to cancel shadow effects.
Right.
So.
Yep, I'll run all the shadow cancellation.
Yeah,
I'll run Quicker Than Sight, Hasty Stroke, and Sterner Than Steel, and I'll still lose the game on a shadow effect.
Yeah.
So.
Yep. So yeah, definitely check it out if you're picking up Return of the King, which there's a lot of there's good heroes in that pack and a lot of other just generically really great cards.
Yep.
For sure.
Yep. Well, there you have it, everybody. Sterner Than Steel. Well, how about we talk again next week, Ted, and we'll see everybody later, right?
I bid you do what you will, but I will hinder it, if I may. Which isn't really fitting because I want to hinder the show, but that's the quote on the card, so I read
it. See you later, everybody.
Do you love the content? Here's what you can do to stay connected. Become a patron. The money collected through Patreon goes into keeping the lights on here at the podcast. We love our patrons, and you can join at many different levels. Visit patreon.com/cardtalk2018. You can subscribe to us, whether you're watching our YouTube channel or you're listening to us in your favorite podcatcher. Hit the subscribe button to get notifications of all our new episodes. Didn't know we were an audio podcast? Find us by searching Card Talk to get access to our 120 plus regular episodes. Didn't know we were a video channel? Find us by searching Card Talk LOTR LCG on YouTube. And there you can find not only our regular episodes, but you can find our bonus playthroughs and other content related to the game. Want to get a hold of Ted, Grant, or myself? Feel free to email the podcast at cardtalk2018@gmail.com.